Hello and welcome to the first episode of Thinking Critically, a D&D discussion. My name is Danilo, and we are flying out of the gate with our first topic, conflict. Today, I'm joined by Rob McPerhson, the DM for our Pilsomnia campaign and a contributor to WizSave Media. Rob, thanks again for coming on. Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, hey, how's it going? I'm Rob. I started playing D&D in 2018. Joined my friend Jason's game. Very typical, edgy, rogue, tiefling, assassin character. Yeah, I kind of got hooked more or less immediately. I've been DMing for a couple of years. As you mentioned, I run a game for yourselves and a few of our friends here. I'm playing a couple of other games. Yeah, it's a funny old game, D&D. There's something about it that
keeps us all coming back.
Yeah. It's never exactly the same thing, dependent on who you play with, dependent on what kind of world you're playing in, whether it's homebrew, whatever it is. There's so much variety, and I know 5th edition gets kind of a bit of a bad rap sometimes because of various things. But yeah, I played a New Minera campaign a long time ago.
Awesome.
It was quite a short-lived one, and I had a lot of fun with that. But D&D, I think, like, it's the best known RPG for a good reason.
All right, thank you very much. So let's dive in then to one of the meatier topics. Out the gate, what does conflict mean to you within the D&D 5e context?
To me, I think if you look at it mechanically, anytime you roll the dice in D&D, there's some degree of conflict involved. Whether it's rolling initiative, whether you are rolling persuasion, deception, stealth, it all ties back to one kind of force pressing against another.
I think that's one thing I really like is that you, as you mentioned, you only need to have played literally a single session, or even less, even half a session, to have had some experience with conflict in the broader sense, which I think is great. It has negative connotations, maybe with the dictionary definition, but when you boil it, D&D down to it, that's the game, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's even down to the role playing aspect. There's Bilbo Baggins went on an adventure because he was bored, right? In The Hobbit, he on his 111st birthday, he was like, I'm done with the Shire. I'm gonna go off on an adventure because I'm tired of this place. That in and of itself, loosely, you could call conflict. He's conflicted with his current way of life. He's not satisfied with the status quo, so he's gonna go on an adventure. The same applies to almost any character that you build, at least in my experience, is going to have a degree of duress. They're going to have something that's pushing them to become an adventurer, or pushing them into circumstances that they're not necessarily prepared for, but will lead to hopefully an interesting campaign or a session or a one-shot.
So like some internal conflict that drives them, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think sometimes that's more difficult than, it's easier said than done. I think that topic, we all love making new characters, some more than others, but I think that's quite a fun element of it, piecing together
for sure, yeah,
this, that, and the other. But I think certainly for maybe lesser experienced people, and again, I think it's a topic I'm going to come back to quite a few times, especially those that have come from perhaps predominantly video game backgrounds. Having that responsibility is a huge addition that they're not ready for. You can't just say, I'm a rogue, and okay, right, click to start. It's no, I'm a rogue, and my parents died, and then they got resurrected, and now I have to go and kill them. And
yeah, absolutely. It's the trouble with D&D being as accessible as it is. It's so easy to create a character, to roll up a character sheet. And that character then exists. You have that character, you can play that character. But what drives them? What's their, if that, I've never encountered a player character that is really happy and has a great home life,
Yeah.
and has no reason to venture beyond
Yeah.
their home or their town, because that would kind of it would be an amazing challenge as a player
Yeah, for
to
sure.
play that character.
Yeah, because
Because
it begs the
whereas
question of like, why are you out risking your life if you've got, like a wife and kids at home, for
yeah,
example? And it's like, well, my daughter's going to be pretty upset if I just die because I'm after
yeah.
some treasure.
And but there immediately there's a potential. Yeah, I've got this great family life, but we're destitute.
Mm,
I need gold. Where's gold? Dragon swords. They
mm,
have gold. Cool. I will go and find a dragon. That's some kind of inner conflict or personal conflict of living within your means is difficult.
mm-hmm.
So how can I better my life for me and my family? I'll go out and get treasure. That's very easy character motivation, but it's derived from conflict.
Yeah, it's a really good point because we've kind of we've mirrored the player character and player there, so that the player might sometimes struggle with themselves in trying to think up something that they might be setting high standards for themselves to say, oh god, I need to write a page worth of decent backstory here to to live up to expectations. Yeah. And again, that backstory has to be good for the character themselves.
Exactly. Yeah, I've played with people that have written kind of half a page of A4 notes, just very broadly, being like, "Oh yeah, he's from this background. He's this kind of guy." But I've equally played with people that have written 30-page backstories and given the not me as the DM, thankfully, but that DM, it's a blessing and a curse, I suppose, because that DM then has a treasure trove of people and things to throw at that character and weave into that story for them. But equally, that's a lot of work to tie it into any work that you've already done. It's tricky.
In my current campaign, two of my players are probably at two of the extremes. So one guy, I think it was a page and a half. It was literally like 7 years ago, and then a flash forward to like halfway in between, and then here's what's happening today, to kind of chronicle where he got from A to B to C, which is really good. And it was written as a piece of fiction rather than a piece of dry text.
Yeah, which is always nice.
And then I have another player who, in his defense, is his first game of this ilk, and this is a shortcoming that I've realised on my part, in that I allowed him to do it, but he went with a bit of the amnesia trope. Sure. So I was like, okay, that's fine. It makes sense. At the time I was saying, that's fine. You're a newbie. Let's just hit the ground running, kind of thing. But then what I've come to realise is that is actually a huge barrier to enable him to roleplay.
I suppose because he doesn't know who his guy is.
Yep, and there's literally there's no conflict. It's literally just like, I don't care what we do because I don't care about anything.
Yeah, I've got nothing that ties me to the world that would cause me one way or the other. If you're playing a true neutral character, maybe, but even then, you have the external factors of the life that you've lived that might push you forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's still things you would find abhorrent, even in true neutral.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's something that I've had to come to terms with tough, myself, and to try and and I have I worked with him when I realised that's a problem. Not a problem is too strong a word, but I want to enable him. So I've worked with him to kind of flesh it out, and I've tied it in to the backstory.
Because it provides you an opportunity, I suppose, to retcon stuff. To say, okay, well, you were amnesiac, you are an amnesiac. You don't have any memories, but that's not to say you haven't lived a life. Let's work out where you have been and how that might filter in, and that can be their personal quest, is to regain their memories. And
and that's something I've got planned, and eventually they'll get to that arc and that chapter, which I'm looking forward to, because that's after all said and done is actually going to be quite a big payoff, because it's this you're drawing back the curtain, and here's all this stuff that you didn't know before, and now you know. what are you going to do with that information? Oh God, I'm a different person now. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm quite looking forward to that. Do you think that at the table between players, say you've got player A is super backstory or super into it, I suppose, for lack of a better term, and then you've got player B who isn't as much or is not capable of being as into it, do you think that has ever caused any conflict, either in game or at the table?
Yeah. I've seen it. I've seen it happen. Yeah, the first campaign that I ran, not that I ran, that I was a part of. I think we had a couple of characters. So I'd come in as this is my first D&D campaign. I'm quite eager. I'd written a decent backstory and worked with the DM quite a lot to build a background that could be tied in some way.
Awesome.
And then there were the other characters that I'd just met. And within the space of maybe like 3 or 4 sessions, it became quite clear that some of the characters wanted different things from the game.
Yep.
And some characters weren't especially happy with the choices they've made in building that character and were like almost suicidal.
Oh,
They
blimey.
were kind of like going like headlong into like unspeakable odds alone, trying to be the hero, which is, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be a hero. It's D&D.
Yep.
But for the sake of letting us get to freedom, and we're kind of like, well, no, we can all escape. We can all get out. You don't need to do that. And he was there kind of like being the go on, get out before it's too late for me. It's like,
like a martyr.
It's like, it's absolutely not too late for you. We can all escape.
We've got loads of time on the clock. Don't worry about it.
So yeah, I think maybe less from a preparation standpoint, but more from a general, what do you want from D&D? What do you want out of this story, this session? I've definitely seen some kind of conflict arise there.
Yeah. Do you have any tips or guidance on how to mitigate that? Because I'm just thinking that is such a balance between 3 to 6 different, most likely completely different people in game.
Mm-hmm.
I try to encourage people being family members or friends beforehand, just because it makes that a little bit easier.
Yeah.
But
and they all were friends. I think everyone knew someone else at the table.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them were work colleagues through kind of Apple and different kind of, they'd worked together in various different places. Yeah, I was very much an outsider in that situation, in that I knew 2 of them. I knew the DM and one of the players, and was introduced and kind of made friends with everyone else that way.
Oh, that makes me feel better from joining your campaign when I was in literally the identical position.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. But I was going to say that in terms of conflict at the table, I'm fortunate enough that it's not that I've never played with anyone I didn't know, because that's how we met.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew Sai, and Sai said, "Oh, my friend Danilo plays D&D. He'd be great at the table. Is it cool if he joins in?" And it's like, yeah, absolutely, because I knew Sai, I trusted Sai, and it's kind of like, oh, if you're vouching for this person, then absolutely they're welcome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the kind of conflict that I've never, fortunately, had to experience is the playing with complete strangers and running a game for people you've never met before, because that's a challenge that I can imagine requires a really specific skill set to be able to kind of surmount.
Yeah, I see. You see a lot of like looking for groups, in Roll20 and that, and looking for DMs. And I've thought to myself before, how does or how can that work? Because you're just going in completely blind. But I guess it's
blind, yeah.
I guess it does somehow, because it wouldn't be as successful otherwise.
And I feel like it's just setting expectations really early. It's taking a session 0, even if that's only half an hour, 40 minutes, saying, cool, what kind of game are you guys looking for? What's off the table in terms of content? Are there any kind of
taboo,
hardline taboo subjects that you don't want? Are we running a murder hobo game? Are we running a story heavy game? It's a lot of conflict in that regard. I feel like that could be mitigated very early by very clear communication.
Yeah, I think that's a. I'm just thinking now that I think session zeros are like job interviews in that they're super important, but you never really get the opportunity to do enough of them to get better at them. Because I basically did one, and it was, well, I have to say it probably wasn't as successful as it could have been. I ran it more as a, to be fair, it was all 3 completely new players, so it was more of an introduction to D&D rather than a typical session zero. So that was again another learning point for me in that those two things are probably different.
That's how our campaign got started.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'd never run it before. I'd been playing for about a year or so, and I was like, I really want to, like, the group was in London and I was in Southampton, so I was like, well, I need to play. if I can't find a group to join, I'll start one.
Yeah.
So it just took to asking people I knew, are you interested in playing D&D? I know this is maybe something you'd be up for. And yeah, for me it was as much a learning experience of being a DM and running a game as it was them learning how to play it, which I could have led to some really bad habits.
Yeah,
but I feel I've been quite lucky in that if I've made mistakes in terms of rules or whatever, then it's not a massive deal. It's, I think this works this way, and then in future we'll do it correctly. And I think a big part of it's just being respectful. It's just respecting your players' time, your players respecting the time you put into preparing a game. A lot of the at the table conflict, aside from in game, that could be again mitigated by mutual respect and communication. I think that's a fairly easier said than done. But
for sure.
A fairly easy kind of template for avoiding clashes.
I think aside from 1 or 2 experimental one-shots that I'd done, the first longer length campaign was with a large group again, I think 6 in total, of younger, late teens at the time. And I gotta say, a couple of those were confrontational, I suppose. And they had, one of them in particular had a real big problem with that separation of player character to character.
Sure.
Which I still find difficult playing, because if I'm ever being, mean, it still feels bad to me. And every time I do, I have to apologise and be like, I care, but my character don't care.
just for clarification, this is Vic acting. This isn't. Yeah.
I'm terribly sorry for your loss out of game, but in game, let's move on, because.
Yeah.
But there wasn't any of that, and I'm afraid to say it almost got to the point where I had to be like, okay, you're going to have to stop doing these things that you're doing, because that's now just being rude in real life. It's quite obvious you're not playing the game anymore.
It's tricky, because especially when you get a degree of, it's what my character would do. There's a difference between playing a role and being a dick.
Yeah.
You can play an evil character and not be horrible to the people you're at the table with.
Yes, yeah.
Again, it comes down to motivation. What's driving your character to do the things they're doing? If you really think about it, an evil character, someone that's got truly malicious intentions, probably cares about themselves more than anyone else, and thus would do anything to keep themselves out of conflict.
Yeah.
Would probably push others into conflict, sure, but wouldn't begin to antagonise the people that are ostensibly, if they're in your party, they're keeping you alive.
Yeah.
That you need them. So there's a there's a very there's a kind of an easy line to draw when it comes to playing an evil character, or playing in a specific way that's like, it's what my character would do.
Yeah.
There's an easy line to draw between being a character and being an asshole at the table.
I think some classes are obviously more susceptible to that for rightly or wrong reasons. So to take the 2 class extremes, you've got wizards who are typically intelligent, typically polite, just by dint of being academic, I suppose.
Yeah,
They might be,
educated and,
they might be aloof, but they're not mean or foolish. And then at the other
yeah,
end of the table, you've got the stereotypical barbarian who can be stereotyped as foolhardy and, charge headlong
yeah.
into battle. So
You've got the meatheads and the nerds.
yeah. So
Yeah,
wizards are mechanically difficult, but then I think the other side of the same coin is that barbarians are more difficult to role play because you've got to really
for sure.
find that middle ground of I would jump off the cliff and not care about hitting the ground in 30 seconds time to chase this goblin off, but I'm not gonna, because then that's just gonna waste 2 hours of everybody's time at the table.
Yeah. Then my party then has to scale that cliff to pick up my dead body and revive me if I'm lucky.
Yeah.
It's it's making intelligent choices. You can play a character and play them clever, like making smart choices with regards to my character might do this, but they've also got a degree of self-preservation.
Yeah. One thing I liked reading a little while ago about that barbarian, because it's something that I've had in the Persona game of like Danilo thinks he might know the solution to this puzzle, but Vic probably wouldn't have crossed the T's and dotted the I's to come to that conclusion, which unfortunately just leads to a bit of frustration because you're like, somebody else just.
Well, I remember a puzzle quite early on it was to do with like sliding panels within a wall to make a relief of a sun rising and a sun setting, and people were kind of tinkering with bits and pieces, and as soon as Vic knew where stuff was supposed to go, he just walked up and pulled the panel off the wall and shoved it into the right place. And
yeah,
it worked. I was like, yeah, okay, I'm satisfied with that. That's that's a solution to the puzzle. But that's something I can imagine a barbarian absolutely doing.
Oh, good. I'll take that as a compliment. But the thing I was reading was saying basically like the barbarian might not, in game might not have worked out that there's a hidden lever behind this fake wall, but then perhaps they rolled really high on investigation, awkwardly high from the DM's perspective, versus say the wizard who rolled low and is a dumb idiot for 30 seconds. But then the way they, your get out clause there, they described it was basically like the barbarian doesn't work out that there's a lever there. Perhaps he's just like tired and leans against the wall, and he happens to lean against the bit that's got the hidden lever behind it.
Yeah, or
which
he
I quite
gets
like.
Frustrated and where the false wall is, he punches the wall and he punches through it.
Yeah, just straight through it.
It's
yeah.
like, oh, hang on.
You're welcome, guys.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was quite good, and I guess it's some way to bridge, where the dice are telling a slightly different story to what might ideally be happening. One thing I see or read a lot about, especially on various subreddits, is if I had £1 for every time there was a post about a DM saying my player does XYZ, or a post that says my DM does ABC, and I don't think it works, I'd be a millionaire.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no shortage of people that don't want to talk to each other.
Exactly. That's what I was just about to say. Like the answer is always just like, did you talk? Did you talk to them? No, I just sat in silence for 5 games.
Yeah, it baffles me that people are willing to stew on something and really let it ruin their game. As a DM, and I'm sure you'll probably agree, my biggest concern is making sure the players at my table are having fun.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I really care about, because when my players are having fun, I'm having a good time.
Yeah.
The reason I put the work into, if I'm doing a homebrew campaign, build the towns and the NPCs and planning encounters and puzzles, is because I want to see you guys enjoy that. Like, if there's something at the table, either from the way I'm running the game or from another player, I would hope that we're all mature enough to discuss it. A great example, and it kind of ties into conflict quite nicely, our friend Nathan's initial character, Nephros, tiefling rogue. They started off that way, became a tiefling warlock, tied to the hells. Over time became more evil.
Yeah, you could say
and
that.
said,
Yep.
did some pretty nefarious things, but came to me and said, I don't really want to play a bad guy because no one at the table likes me. No one else in the party likes Nephros. I was like, well, yeah, you keep on doing really shady stuff, which is fine. You're allowed to, and you're dealing with the consequences of it as we play. Which, if you're happy to do, then cool. But if you're not happy doing that, let's work something out. And now we've got a really dastardly NPC villain that used to be a player character that has now kind of been given to me as the DM to do what I will with. And there's some really cool stuff that I've got planned with that character now, by virtue of being able to have a conversation with Nathan the player and him being kind of comfortable saying, yeah, like this isn't the most fun I could be having.
Yeah.
Which I really appreciated him coming to me with that. It made me feel like I'm doing a good job as a DM, that he's able to. But also, that I'm able to hopefully make the rest of the party have a better time by virtue of not dealing with an evil bastard in their ranks.
Well, I can tell you, if anyone's ever struggling for something to galvanise the players, there's nothing better than one of the former party members turning on them, and then suddenly you've got the rest of the table who are like, man, I don't care about whatever the hell Save the World quest we were on before. That guy's got to die.
Yeah, it's got to go down. It's a matter of principle at that point.
The world can wait because, like, Jim, he's a bastard. I gotta say that was, it made a great table experience as well as the rest of the players and who didn't know that was going to happen.
Yeah, which it's part of why I love DMing, is that you get kind of a front row seat to that kind of stuff playing out. I always try to run the game as though it's not my game, it's your guys' game. I'm just giving you the fuel, if you like.
Sure.
I'd say the vast majority of that was Nathan's idea, and I was all too happy to roll with it.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's my current game there are conflict between some of the players. Not quite. Well, perhaps they are, and maybe I need to start bridging that subject with them. As maybe some of them aren't aware that's even something you could even do. So yeah, which again is, I guess, one thing that I don't think it does as a system or framework is communicate the commitment, I guess is a way to put it. So
sure,
especially if you start a longer campaign, and I get that there's short campaigns and there's 5 sessions, there's one shots and whatnot, but especially starting a longer campaign, that I'm always forthcoming and saying, look, this thing I'm thinking of running is long. Think about what you want to play. As for new players, if they're like, I'll just want to cast spells, so I'll be a sorcerer, and I go, okay, they're a bit complicated. Are you going to be okay with that? Yeah, it'd be fine. And then 3 levels in, they're like, what the hell is any of this stuff?
Yeah. What is meta magic? What's going on? What does that mean? Yeah.
What is a spell slot?
Yeah, I would always tend to. So I started another campaign for another bunch of guys at work that I was very kind of keen to say, try, like, if you want a fun experience to begin with, try these classes out. I was try fighter, try rogue. It's quite easy to play.
Yeah.
Druids aren't especially difficult. There's a bit more to them in that you've got your beast shapes and the different circles and stuff. But these are the kind of the ones that are probably slightly more accessible to begin with. And a few of them were like, oh, I quite like the idea of a sorcerer. It's like, okay, take a read through it. Look through the player's handbook at that class, and if all of it looks good to you, or even most of it looks good to you, by all means, if you're confident playing that. But I'm, again, going back to the main focus, I want you to have fun. And I don't want you to stress out about how many sorcery points you have left and any of that. Like, it's far easier to just, do I get sneak attack? Yes or no? Cool. Loads of damage. Great.
Yeah, which is a really rewarding for lower level players to have that sneak attack on top. It's just like, oh, I barely had to do anything, and I've out DPS'd everyone else. I'm having fun.
Yeah, well, that's I think part of why I went for a rogue is looking through the PHB early on. Some of the bits and pieces you pick up quite early were really appealing.
Mm.
Sneak attack being one. I worked with Jason, the DM, to create a custom specific assassin background.
Awesome.
Based on my backstory.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of being able to cast darkness, I was able to cast silence.
Mm-hmm.
And like little kind of tweaks like that were really, really, really good fun.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. So we've talked a bit about conflict around the table and problems between players and problems between players and the DM, and oh man, I don't know, thinking about it, because anytime I think about it, I just recall some of the horror stories you hear, and it's like of people saying this guy openly cheats.
Yeah.
And what do we do about it? And then you find 2 days later they've replied to the subreddit, and it's like, oh yeah, the DM owed him some money, so he was just like allowing him to cheat. And I'm just thinking,
Like,
man, this is bonkers.
Yeah. In what world does that happen? Surely, yeah, it's bonkers.
Yeah, so that was.
I don't understand. Not just how you can get yourself into that situation,
Yeah,
but how the other players allow it to happen.
yeah,
How people are willing to just sit there and say, yeah, this is fine, I guess.
yeah.
But so clearly it's not.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh, good. I've stunned you into into
No,
silence for that one.
Yeah, it's just some of the horror stories are. It beggars belief that the tables can be that bad, but then equally, you look at some of the replies to a lot of those threads, and the one that the most common reply that I see, that there is an argument for it. It's like, his table, his rules. Fair enough. If you don't want to play at that table, or the DM wants to play a specific game and that's communicated well, fair enough. It's when it's at the expense of the player's experience.
Yeah,
it just doesn't seem to make any sense to me. Like, there's no value there.
And the logical end point of that, his table, his rules, is that the other players go, okay, well, we don't want to play with those rules, so goodbye. And then neither does anyone else, so he doesn't have a table anymore.
Who are you going to run a game for? Yeah.
So I wanted to talk, before we go on to anything else, talking of Nephiros and his nefarious ways in terms of conflict between player characters. And I am quite against any extended or serious PvP. I don't feel like, I know the framework isn't built for PvP. It's just not designed to be balanced in any way.
I'd agree with that.
There'll be a min-max cookie cutter build that would just beat any other class any day, forever.
Yeah.
Short bouts of, I might throw my dagger at him, that kind of stuff, I don't mind. But what are your thoughts on PvP?
I feel like within reason it's fine. And that's I suppose the caveat of within reason is difficult to quantify.
Yeah.
It would vary table by table, group by group, but I think as long as it's not disrupting the flow of the game and it's not significantly detrimental to any individual's experience, then it's, to a degree, it's fine. This you've got a lawful good paladin and a sneaky chaotic good rogue, and the chaotic good rogue wants to pickpocket this Ponzi shopkeep, and the paladin's like, I stop him. That's perfectly reasonable. You have conflicting roles there to see who comes out on top, like maybe dexterity versus strength, that kind of thing. I feel like is fine. It's when it comes to I draw my sword and stab him, then I'm kind of like, well, hang on, but to what end? Why are you doing that?
That's a good point, because I don't think I've ever been in that position.
No, and I can't recall a situation where I've had to step in and be like, one of the biggest things I'm vehemently against saying no.
Mm.
I'm far more inclined to say, well, maybe we could, you could try this or roll for it, and then coming up with, let's say, I want to jump off the back of this cart onto the one next to it.
Yeah.
It's, you've already set the scene where that's a ridiculous jump. You don't have any magical items that can allow you to propel yourself that far, so sure, roll for it. They roll incredibly well, so it's like, you don't quite make that jump, but you land next to it and you're holding onto the edge of the cart and your feet are dragging along the ground.
Yeah, and next turn you can pull yourself up, kind of thing. Yeah.
I feel like that's a reasonable kind of thing. When it comes to PvP, fortunately, I've never had to deal with I stab him.
Yeah. I just can't see how that would ever end. We just have two players roll dice at each other for half an hour. And...
Yeah, which for everyone else at the table is kind of boring.
Well, actually, more likely it's the paladin rolls level 9 smite and just disintegrates the rogue. But
yeah. It's like, I disengage. It's like, no, too late, dude. You made a...
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm curious, do you think that maybe holds some players or some player characters back in terms of there's that grey area of this is maybe not quite my guy territory just yet, but it is also not, I'm just not sitting on my hands. There's that middle ground of this is still within the realm of possibility that I would do.
Sure.
But they have to say no because it would lead to PvP, and they're almost internalizing the no. So the DM might not have said no, but they've said no to themselves, which in a way is
I can't
kind of
do
just
that
as bad
because it's gonna ruin the game, and that is just as bad because you don't want anyone to feel like they can't act, to feel like they can't do stuff. Like McPerhson made the you can certainly try phrase famous, and I'm all for giving even the most outlandish ideas a go. I had a character in one of the games I ran. They found this abandoned shack with a dead body, and there was a mug, like a stein, on this table, and they grabbed the stein, and it was a mimic. And they were like, okay, I want to bury my hand. I was like, okay, sure. How? It's like, I'm going to use my sword to stab into the ground and move as much dirt as I can, shove my head down and cover it all over so that this mimic suffocates.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like, there's a weird genius to that.
Yeah.
And I hadn't considered for a second that would be a way to deal with something that had latched itself onto your arm.
Yeah.
But it made sense. And I was like, okay, yeah, roll dexterity, I guess, or athletics to see like how quickly you can move enough earth to bury your arm wrist deep.
Yeah.
And then there was other characters like, I move earth to make the space so that she could do it. It was like, okay, cool, this is brilliant. But yeah, that kind of stuff I'm fine. Like that, I'm all for. Like I'm absolutely in favour of people going with whatever they consider to be an option. If they think, I could probably do this, I can probably get away with this. A great example would be early on in our campaign, you came to an abandoned tower where there was a young lady at the top of it and a troll, and you wanted to get up to the top. So Vic, the Goliath character, launched the gnome character up through the window. And that's kind of a bit of a Hail Mary thing, but it's like, yeah, absolutely roll for it. See if you can do it.
There's that school of thought that says it's basically yes, but. So, yes, you can leap to the other carriage, but you'll be falling off the side. Do you think you could turn that on its head for the situation of the paladin wants to stab the rogue in the shot with a no but? Do you think there's any legs to that concept? I know you just said you don't ever want to say no. But
I think I don't ever want to say no on principle. In principle, in reality, you have to, right? You have to. There has to be some degree of. But again, I feel like that's something. If it's difficult because it's not necessarily something you would foresee and discuss in a session 0. I know that thinking about it, I've never brought it up when I've talked to people. It's like, oh yeah, are you guys likely to fight each other?
Yeah.
Because in my head, it's like no, of course not. You're a team.
Yeah.
You know, you guys are a party because you help each other survive. Like,
Yeah.
fighting each other is diametrically opposed to keeping each other alive.
Yeah, it should be the last thing on their to-do
Yeah.
list. Yeah.
But in that kind of situation, it doesn't have to come down to the character leaving. It could be another character steps in, puts a hand on the shoulder. No, we don't need to do it. Or you don't need to do this. Let's talk about it. Because I'm willing to bet up to that point, those characters had probably come to a head. They'd probably had clashes before that hadn't been resolved.
Yeah.
In order for it to get to the point where that paladin is likely to want to go that far to harm the other player character.
Yeah.
Or it's very early on, and that's kind of a bullet dodged in saying, hey, look, that's not the game we're playing.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
And if that's the game you want to play, I'm sure there are groups that are all for it. The ones I play, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think, again, another potential failing on my part for my campaign is that, to tie off what you were saying there about, you're a party, you're working together, you're trying to keep others alive. The way I engineered it, probably from an experience point of view, was let me deal with getting you all together and sending you off on a mission. But what that has bred is that they are a party out of circumstance rather than anything else. There's not a huge amount of loyalty there, perhaps less than I would have liked. And, they've been through thick and thin. They've killed people and nearly been killed and so on and so on, that you'd hope would breed a level of familiarity there. But what is working against these guys is basically all of them are concealing something or lying about something or not completely forthcoming with all the information. So that
all
combined
the best characters are, right? All the best characters have something, some kind of dark secret that they're either trying to outrun or eventually pursue and take care of.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like the most cliche you meet in a tavern can be an entirely circumstantial grouping of individuals. It's tricky. I've seen session zeros played before where you'll play 2 or 3 small groups where it's like you two know each other.
Yeah.
One mechanic I've seen that works really interestingly is everyone's character at the table knows at least one other character.
Oh, okay. So
Even just
6 degrees of separation kind of thing.
So in theory, they've got ties to each other ahead of time. So it could be, okay, so you both grew up in the same orphanage. One of you went off to be a ranger and you've been kind of looking after this estate, and the other one's gone off and has joined the local thieves guild. The one that joined the local thieves guild knows a fence who's tired of being a fence and is looking for something a bit more exciting to do, and then it circles back, so everyone has a tie in some way or another. I think
that is a great idea.
It's a really cool idea, because it gives everyone a reason to want to stick together. It's like, no, I can vouch for that guy, that guy's cool. But equally, you've got people that have never met and may have conflict and may have opposing viewpoints and opposing motivations, which is, can be great. It can be great storytelling at the table. Yeah, it can lead to some really cool, if not in some instances really horrible, events occurring. Yeah, but that makes that's the game.
No, I like that idea. Yeah, I'm gonna have to think about that. I've gone, unfortunately, the other way. I've kind of stepped into an interim DM role for a little bit, and of short term, kind of rerunning a chapter that I'd run before. Went the other direction and just said, I can't. We haven't got time, and I can't be bothered essentially to go through the rigmarole of a couple of sessions of wind up. Yeah. So I just said, you're all treasure hunters, and you've known each other before, so don't worry about that. You're already traveling together looking for a piece of treasure, but that has its own pitfalls. I mean, the role play in the first session was no less difficult than it is in any other given session, because the players still didn't really know each other's player characters. So it was this middle ground of, we don't need to talk because we're friends, but also I don't actually know anything about you or how you'll act. So
yeah, it's like, oh hey, remember that time that we raided this tomb? And it's like, no, that didn't happen. It's like, oh, yeah, of course it did.
yeah,
That's one of the things that we shared. As no, okay,
oh.
right.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
yeah, it must be really difficult because, yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah, that I wouldn't completely recommend unless maybe you let the players share a lot of time beforehand to hash that
You're
stuff
on the
out.
road and you've got to camp for a few nights before you get there.
Mm-hmm.
Who's taking the watch? Have a conversation.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and I think it's tricky as well when you've got certain players, especially less experienced players, quite often are less willing to role play,
mm-hmm.
and it's entirely understandable on the basis that it's kind of scary when you've never done it before.
For sure.
It's really like it can be really uncomfortable being like, oh, yes, I'm I'm a dragonborn, of course. Yes, great.
I have scales. I think.
Yes. My parents. Oh, I hadn't thought of that. Oh, yeah. They're because it's D&D. Of course, they're dead.
When you're sitting next to a player who's like, and my second cousin removed, he did the wedding dress for my nephew who are currently residing in this continent, and and then there's just you sitting there like
this hammer that I'm carrying. It's it's been blessed by this deity that you've probably never heard of because I came up with it with the DM, and don't worry about it. That'll come out later, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the important information here is screaming the new player. Everything and nothing. That's the game.
Told you everything about me and you still have no idea who I am.
Yeah. Do you think that... Actually, we touched on it earlier in terms of avoidance. So I asked my girlfriend before coming on, I said, what does... Outside of even D&D, what does the word conflict mean to you? And she said... I don't know. I try to avoid it at any given situation. And I said that's actually a pretty valid point. Like that conflict avoidance is, I think, what a lot of sensible people try and do in their daily lives. It's
absolutely because conflict in a very black and white sense is bad, right? It's disrupting the norm. It's getting in the way of doing what you want to do or being comfortable.
I'm lucky in that I haven't experienced any players ever have that problem of wanting to avoid conflict. The opposite.
I feel like that'd be a really interesting player to play though. A really interesting character to play.
That's one of the things that attracts me to the Paladin Oath of Redemption, is it? Where they're basically a pacifist. And that everybody can be redeemed, and that combat should be the last
the
course
absolute
of
last
action.
possible thing. So I'll never strike first.
Yeah, which I love for the exact same reason that would be really interesting to be like, no, like we're being attacked by highwaymen on the road, but you don't know what kind of life they've lived. They might have been orphans and been beaten up and
maybe they're trying to find food because they haven't eaten in 3 days. Maybe they're trying to steal our rations.
Which I would love to see more of those characters, because it still breeds conflict but with a completely different spin.
Yeah, absolutely, because especially if you've got more bloodthirsty player characters that are no, they deserve to die, they attacked us, and then you've got a very reasonable viewpoint of, well, no, they don't deserve to die, we don't know who they are, we don't know what's driven them to this, let's talk to them. Meanwhile, you might have your warlock Eldritch blasting them to death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You need mature players and maybe slightly more experienced players to pull that off in a way that everybody has fun, because it's very easy for the paladin in that example to be like, no, let's talk to them. The warlock Eldritch blasts, and then the paladin goes, well, I didn't get a chance to play my character again, so and then that can quickly turn into a Nathan Nephros situation of I can't do anything here. I'm not having.
Let's pivot to something that's going to be helpful to the party, and that I'm going to probably have more fun playing.
Yeah.
It does remind me though. There was one of the most fascinating encounters that I've ever seen was an injured guard rolls into town, and they're speaking about there's a goblin group kind of that have invaded like the local woods. So the adventurers go off to confront them, and they sneak up, and one of them happens to speak Goblin, so she sneaks up a little bit closer and starts listening in. And the way I'd thought of it was that they had been ousted from their town, like their little kind of goblin town that was up in the mountains, by a dragon. A dragon had come and been like, "No, this is my space now.
Yeah,
go away." And quite rightly, they were like, "Right, well, we need to leave." And they were hungry, and they were scavenging. And this guard had seen goblins, immediately thought, "No, they need to die." The goblins attacked them, and they got the best of him, so he ran. And they were very much kind of like, "Cool, you can't stay here, but we're not going to fight you. We have no intention of fighting you." And it was all contingent on them having the ability to listen and empathize.
Yeah.
And I completely forgot that character could speak Goblin, and I wasn't expecting that to happen. I had the fight ready. I was entirely expecting it to be a couple of bugbears, a bunch of goblins, and they'd come to blows. But no, they took a very empathetic route, and it was awesome. I was kind of taken aback by it. I was like, "Oh, this is really unusual, and I don't know quite what to do with it, but I'm here for it."
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and think of ways to engineer that now in my campaign. Or something similar to that effect.
Yeah, and I feel like that's another way that conflict can work is a massive part of D&D. You know, whenever you hear someone talking about how to prepare for a session, like how much time you should spend, and you say, you want 2 or 3 encounters. I feel like an encounter doesn't have to be combat.
No.
It doesn't have to be rolling initiative and having a fight. An encounter can be like what I've just described, of doing a bit of stealth and encountering these creatures and trying to understand more about their situation. From a roleplay perspective, that's way more valuable.
Yeah.
You'll learn way more about your character and your party, and maybe even the world that you're inhabiting, through that kind of encounter than you will a fight. And it's kind of it's a conflict, but it's an avoidance of conflict in a way.
Yeah.
It's kind of dealing with conflict in a non, it's spoken words instead of pointy sticks.
Yeah, it's quite poetic in a way. Yeah, it's a nice utilisation of conflict avoidance in a good sense, rather than the preconception I had of it being a negative thing, of being too timid or too scared to do anything. So no, I do quite like that take on it, of there are always choices, which is something I've said to my guys before. Like there's always a choice. Very rarely is there not a choice.
And that's where kind of railroading gets into play, and that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. If we take it up a couple of levels then, because one thing that we haven't talked about much is, I guess, to close the loop a little bit, is the dictionary definition of conflict. So in terms of things like nations at war and geographical borders being fought over and other kind of in-universe aspects of conflict.
Yeah, like macro conflict instead of micro.
Yeah. I haven't read The Art of War or anything, so I'm not in a place to start fabricating wars. A DM friend of mine, Jamie, his campaign, he basically had his player characters at the vanguard of a battalion of soldiers. So they had X hundred soldiers, and he's asking me, he's like, "Danlo, man, why have I done this? How do I get the players to manage a battalion, like food, rations, flanking.
Yeah.
How long is it going to take for them to march? Like morale. I was like, man, don't we? You're on your own, pal. Because
That's a whole kind of. I think there's a Matt Colville book that addresses that kind of stuff. I think he's come up with a rule set. From what I understand, is a really elegant way of dealing with that kind of that scale of combat. But yeah, like that's the kind of you may need to look at some homebrew stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
For that. But it's kind of like the most recent, the current campaign of Critical Role is set within a continent that's got two warring nations. Kind of conflict on a grander scale can be used to dictate the tone of the world that the players are in, which is quite an interesting that I hadn't considered till now.
No, me neither. But then now we've mentioned it out loud, it seems like such an obvious thing because cult history is shaped by the world wars, for example, have forever changed the course of history, and during that time, it very much coloured everybody's day-to-day interaction.
Absolutely.
You don't know who's listening, the propaganda being dropped by planes and that kind of stuff. So it's it's...
And even looking more recently, if you look at the, not to get too heavy, but just from a matter of perspective, you look at the US invasion of Iraq. So you've got soldiers from the US side that are going because there's a war on terror and they have to go.
Yeah.
But then you've got innocents on the other side that are kind of like, well, there's this invading foreign faction that are destroying buildings that, that was my school. So there's an opportunity from a character perspective. There's inspiration there that you could draw on if you're building a world or playing in a world that is based in heavy military combat. From both sides, you could have perspectives of conflict and the different ways that conflict affects and motivates those characters. There's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, and I'm now kicking myself for not using or seeing that opportunity before establishing a world. But there's always the beauty of homebrew is that there's always ways to
there's always other continents, there's always other worlds.
Tweak it on the fly.
Yeah.
I think if I'm being kind to myself, it would be because I wanted to focus it on the day to day, but as in, make the players the stars of the show and not have these kind of faceless generals dictating, a bunch of stuff that maybe it removes agency, I suppose.
In a very real sense, they're war heroes, right? They're if you're putting them in a situation already where they're in charge and they have the opportunity to win huge battles, then the war hero aspect of that is baked in. And everyone wants to play D&D to be a hero or a villain.
Yeah, I've got to go and do some homework now, I think, which wasn't my intended outcome of this, but to kind of have a think about how to introduce that. But I don't know if you've had any experience or played any games where that larger scale stuff has come into it. There's always conflict between like the Thieves Guild and the local guard, the pesky scamps. But is there any more, I guess, seriously toned stuff that you've ever been a part of?
In terms of like wargaming or anything like that?
Well, I guess not necessarily war. It could just be conflict at large, I suppose, is a better way to put it. So just between political houses. Could there's a layer of noir intrigue there.
I've always been fascinated by that. I've never played any wargaming stuff. I played Warhammer when I was a bit younger, very briefly, but I never spent the time to fully grasp the rules.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
Yeah, but speaking of kind of noir intrigue and political intrigue, I've got two of the D&D source books, the Dragon Heist book and the Eberron book. Both have a lot of not warring factions, but conflict between houses and political parties and stuff. And that's reading through those books. It's fascinating. It's kind of it definitely coloured one of the characters that I created for one of the campaigns I play in. It's a goblin artificer.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, I'm very much of the opinion, if I have the opportunity to play something weird, I'd much rather do that than a human fighter,
Yeah.
because I am a human. I'm not a goblin. I'm not. One of the other characters I'm playing is a Leonin barbarian,
Yeah.
which is kind of like, yeah, of course I want to be a 7 foot tall lion
Yeah.
dude.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't I want to play that? But yeah, the Goblin Artificer is kind of like the motivation behind the character was a spy. I wanted him to be an unassuming, oh, I'm just a tinkerer. I
Yeah.
just build these little toys, when in fact he's trying to gather information.
Yeah, that's awesome. I need to check out those books. I have one of the I think I have the more recent Eberron book, and I know from a cursory look through some of it, it's, you know, houses vying for.
There's a ton of really cool stuff within the Eberron side of D&D. It's always like, because it's more kind of pulpy and kind of, you've got like arc trains and
Yes.
it's very, very cool.
Yeah, I think I'd like to either DM or be a part of a more grounded. It doesn't seem like the right word because you've just said arc trains, but yeah, I think you know what I mean. I guess less fantasy and more
pulpy.
Pulpy, yeah, exactly as you said. Yeah, to just have for combat to be the exception rather than the rule. So when there's a fight, it's okay, this is something's gone wrong here. To have to bear arms is a big deal. Whereas I think most campaigns, your goblin example was unusual because as you said yourself, you're expecting them to just fight them. Most campaigns it would be fighting is the rule, and then anything else is the exception. So yeah, I think I'd be quite interested
and I feel like that's kind of ingrained through, like, if you've got to play a party of level 1 characters and they meet in a tavern and you need them to clear out the basement because there's a rat infestation, like that's a very stock kind of introductory experience that teaches players you're going to have to fight stuff.
Yeah.
Which isn't a bad thing to learn, because you likely will have to fight stuff. That's a significant portion of the mechanics of D&D.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a huge benefit to ingraining, like you said, there's always options. There's always a choice.
There is always a choice, which is easy to forget, I think, from both players and a DM's perspective.
Yeah.
In terms of I'm expected to, or I should be doing this, or have we talked about that yet? Is easy to forget, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Do you have any other thoughts or comments on conflict and how it is within the D&D 5e framework?
I just find it fascinating when you kind of gave us the list of kind of topics to discuss. The first one that jumped out was conflict, because it felt so integral to D&D. It drives the game itself, which I think is a very fascinating concept.
It's great because if I had my mum in the room and said, "Mum, I'm playing this game, it's all about conflict," she'd be like, "Why are you playing such a horrible game?"
Why would you want to do that?
Yeah.
But I'm fascinated to see someone play a character that has nothing to gain from going out adventuring. I kind of I can't imagine it, and I want to see it done.
Is that like chaotic neutral then, I guess? It's just like, I'm just here to be alive, so let's live it.
I've got no reason to come out adventuring. I've got no reason to join this party, but I'm going to because, well, why not?
Yeah. Adventure calls.
Adventure calls, yeah.
That can be quite a good foil to other players who have got very strong ties.
Yeah, very reasonable motivation to want to go out and do the hero stuff, as opposed to you've got just some guy that's just like, oh, you know, I've got nothing better to do.
I'm also here. All right. Well, in that case, then I think we've, ironically, as broad and yet precise as the term conflict is, I feel like we've exhausted it, but also only scratched the surface.
Yeah.
In the same breath.
Absolutely.
So I certainly think that based on what we've talked about today, there are springboards for other avenues of discussion down the line. But I think for today, we've come to a nice bow tie of
Yeah.
closing the loop.
Yeah,
So,
I'd say so.
all that's left to say in that case is thank you very, very much. You've been a great guest.
Thanks for having me.
That's
Yeah,
all right.
it's,
It's super insightful, super fun, and I felt like I've learned a lot, and I'm frustrated with myself in a good kind of way. I've got my own internal conflict right now as to what my next step should be. But no, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thanks to everyone at home for listening. Next episode, I'll be talking to Jack Wayne about ability. Thank you and good night.